Hello, all, and welcome to today's World Discord podcast. How you doing, Joel?
Awful, because we have an awful episode to do today. But other than that, I'm fine.
Excellent. So I'm Brian Endless here with Joel Astro. We have no other guest because we're probably going to talk for too long anyway. I don't know about you, Joel, but this whole college professor thing has kids asking me questions every single freaking day about what did Donald Trump do in the last 10 minutes? And is our country falling apart? And, should we move to another planet? How about you?
Pretty much the same. In my classes, I very rarely focus on what we're going to start this episode with. I cast it more in really broad general terms rather than the particular, um, I would almost say, crimes against our political system that are happening every day.
Yep.
So I focus more on. I've really been zeroed in on the norms and um, sort of what it means for how people understand how they're supposed to behave in relation to each other in the political system. We'll get into that.
Yep.
But yeah, really every class, and it doesn't even really matter what the topic of the course is.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, we both teach international stuff, and
Yeah.
every one of my international classes, I try not to talk about U.S. domestic policy, but then I also have current events, and all the current events in the news right now are what's happening to U.S. foreign policy and the U.S.
Yeah.
interacting with, how is this Trump decision today? How is this White House decision going to affect foreign policy? So it's
And
impossible to get away from.
that's a good point, and we will not be talking about that in this episode today.
Exactly.
But our next episode will focus squarely on the foreign policy stuff and not the domestic. But it is important to keep in mind that everything we talk about today, like it or not, and regardless of the America First garbage or not, the United States remains the most powerful country in the world economically and militarily. And although we don't seem to hold the ideals anymore, in terms of the realm of ideals, and we see other states in rather terrifying fashion
Yeah.
following us.
Well, not only following us, but I think the other thing is states watch us, and
Yeah.
they don't just watch us to follow and do what we're going to do. They watch us because at our best we help with world order and we help keep
Correct.
things peaceful, and at our worst we cause chaos, and
And
we've
they need to
entered into.
prepare.
Exactly. And they
Yeah.
need to figure out how to prepare. And we've entered into that chaos period again.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the chaos and then maybe talk a little bit about how we got here and who knows where we might be going. Maybe we'll take a guess at that at the end.
And
You
let's
want
try
to
not to talk about it with chaos.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So you want to start? What's the number one topic that you would like to talk about here?
Well, you mean in terms of the specific? Let's talk about governing by executive order.
Okay, excellent idea. So for me, I'll you got the topic. I'll start. I'll give the first comment on it. This is something that Nixon was the peak of it in the 1960s and 70s.
And in relative terms, he was not a crook. He was right.
Exactly. Yep. Everything went down after that because everybody remembered Watergate, and then it really started to pick up again. And it picked up again with W, and then with Obama, with obstructionists on both sides and not being able to have Congresses, so they started taking a lot more to the executive. And then with Trump, and the courts started moving in positions that allowed more executive orders, which might have been by plan. That may very well be something that people were planning for a long point in time. But we're seeing Congress and to some extent the courts giving up what was the balance of power. And the other side is, if you talk about the media as the fourth estate, the media seems to almost have completely given up their role there, in no small part because they've been bought out by a bunch of people who are arguably benefiting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a fundamental. So this is about this episode's discord in American politics, but what we're really talking about is, I published a book called The Demise of Democracy in Russia, and I see this as the demise of democracy in the United States. because rule by executive order without checks and balances is not democracy.
Right. Now, to be fair, I'm at a slightly different point than you're at, which is I'm not sure we were ever really a very good democracy. I'm not talking in the silly way where people fight, is a Republican democracy still a democracy? Yeah, I'm sorry. We're in political science here. You call it democracy as a generic term. It doesn't mean one vote makes every decision. You elect your representatives. They represent you. It's a constitutional republic. That's still a democracy. So let's get that off the table for the minute. I hate that when people try to nitpick on the terms there. But to me, this is a country that started with our founding fathers, as great as they may be, were a bunch of white male property owners who took all the power to themselves. And we have gotten a little bit better and a little bit worse over time. But at the same time, we've still had a lot of power in the hands of small groups. It has looked more like democracy in the past, though. But it's rare to find a time where it was, real power to the people and real representatives elected by the people and representing the people. The representatives have other interests. That all being said, when you and others say democracy is going away, I think the biggest thing is we're kind of giving up on any pretense of democracy now.
And we've as a society, culturally, we've embraced the truths that we held, past tense, to be self-evident.
Right.
Did we live up to them? No. But did we aspire to them? And really, the arrow of our politics, really, you can say since the end of the Civil War, it's not linear. There have been steps forward and back.
Absolutely.
But it has been a continual expansion of the application of those ideals to more and more of our population. Right?
100%.
Like if you are even in the Trump era, right? If you're gay today, the rights you enjoy, at least up until this administration, are more guaranteed and more expansive than ever before in our history. And you can really say that with almost any segment of the population. So, right, there is no perfect union. The phrase is in order to form a more perfect union.
Right.
There are aspirations, ideals that we aim for. And I say our democracy is over because our government's no longer aiming for those aspirations.
Right. No, and that I completely agree with. This is one of those. So I've called us a plutocracy now for late 1990s, something like that, is when I first started noticing it, which is ruled by or for the rich. Right. But we always had at least the shadow of democracy in front of it, and the rich people had to get everybody else to vote and get everybody else out to do it. We're starting to move into points where the rich are just taking control and people
benefiting
themselves directly. Yeah. And it's significant. You look at, let's forget about Trump for a minute. You look at Project 2025 and
that is trying.
Well, I think Trump's a tag on to Project 2025. We can disagree on that. I don't think he's driving it. I think the people behind him are driving it.
Are driving him.
Yeah, exactly, and are driving him. I see him, not that this is not. I don't want to worship him or anything. I see him being used here, though, as much as using. I think there are some people behind the scenes that are still doing it, and a part of it is a society that is in chaos is better for the group that's currently in power than a society that's orderly.
It's organized. Yeah,
that helps people. Yeah.
And that's what, to tie it back to the executive orders, every one of these executive orders is destabilizing, is undermining, is destroying efforts to organize accountability and transparency.
100%. Yeah, in the name of accountability and transparency.
To the benefit of those rich few, of the plutocrats, right?
100%.
Those are the ones who are benefiting from this, whether it is the State Department spending $500 million buying cyber trucks, so that means the American taxpayers directly putting money into Elon Musk's pocket.
Right.
While he's saying that it's efficiency, he is using our money to, for some reason, to make up for the decline in sales because of populations disgusted. at him,
Or,
right? So
for
the
instance,
plutocrats keep taking over
yeah, defunding the Department of Education. This is one I've had to
everything.
explain to people. Why
Yeah,
would you want to defund the Department of Education? Well, let me lay out the picture for you. When you defund the Department of Education, you can't get rid of it because Congress would have to do that, but you
but
can
they
cut
will.
it to the bare bones. What ends up happening is education gets worse, and people start buying into demands more and more for vouchers for private education, and vouchers for private education go to private schools, and private people make money off of private schools. And then at the same time, you get people who are in the lower 75% now who are still going to depend on public education, because we're never going to give a voucher where everybody can actually afford school. We're just
Correct.
vouchers that help people who already have the money get into school. And
Right.
the people who are stuck in private education are worse off, and they just become better workers who have even less chance to make a good thing for themselves and have a good life for themselves.
Right.
And they get even more trapped in the society that we're in. And it's all one big circle. And this is every single place. That anytime I hear the words defund something, I always look at, well, this is what the two words that are most important to me in every society: who benefits. Anytime I hear someone wants to defund government, I wonder who's benefiting from defunding government. And it
And
ain't it ain't the
it's
90% of
not
us.
the no. It's the 1/10 of 1%. No.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do want to disagree with one thing you said.
Sure.
Um,
No,
uh,
no, you can't.
they
I'm sorry.
are eliminating the Department of Education, and because Congress has emasculated itself, because the MAGA fascist party is in lockstep with Trump and the plutocrats. They are part of that. Um, they can abolish the Department of Education without, just like they did USAID. That also, the law says that required an act of Congress.
Right.
But they've abolished it without an act of Congress. And the
That-
courts have shrugged and said, whatever. And Congress has shrugged and said, go ahead. And the American people are like, what?
I think we might be talking about a technicality here. I'm going to disagree a little bit here. I don't think USAID is gone yet. I think that they are moving toward it, and if they can get away with it, they're going to. And I think it's going to make for some very interesting politics. I see the current wave, the first executive orders to get through this, as throwing out as much chaos as humanly possible to muddy the waters and to make people distrust everything, because distrust in government, who benefits? A tiny number of people at the
Right.
top benefit, and who benefits from small government? A tiny number of people at the top. But the more we distrust it, and the more confusion, and the more the press is going in a million different directions at once, the more the people don't know what to think. Let's take USAID, though.
And the rulers can do whatever they want because
Exactly.
everyone else is confused. But
Exactly.
AID's gone, Brian, except for I think it is 6 top officials. Everyone else has been fired as of Thursday.
But that firing is not yet final. And one of the things that is going to be interesting to see is what happens when the federal employees union suits move forward, because we're still very much in the lawsuit phase of this. USAID will be gone, to me, at one point in time or another, when Congress decides it's gone, which the Republican Congress might decide that. That's entirely possible. Or when the Supreme Court decides that all of the stuff that's been done can stand, which also might happen. The scary thing to me is, short of that, I can see a world in which, and we're starting to see that world, frankly, it's happened once already last week. I can see a world in which the court rules against the administration and the administration ignores it.
They already
And
have.
they have, and that happened once last week. Now, though, what happens, and this is the one that keeps me up, and that wakes me up early at least, and that freaks me out, is what happens when the Supreme Court actually goes against, because the administration does something that's bad enough that even this Supreme Court says, yeah, you can't do that. Come on. And probably birthright citizenship may be one of these things. I expect the Supremes will uphold birthright citizenship. I don't think they'll knock over the Constitution for the executive order. But that being said, what if they rule in favor of it and the administration says, we're going to go ahead anyway, and we're just going to act as if you didn't do anything?
And that there's the crux of the problem. So if you ask a USAID employee, and I don't know if you have since Thursday,
I have
They've
friends
been
in
told they
multiple
no
places
longer
like that.
have jobs.
Right. Yeah, and
They
now
are no longer employees of the United States government.
they have been told they no longer have jobs. They have been told they're no longer employees. Their unions have not accepted that yet. And that's one of the things that
And
should be a power of unions is that
sure,
the lawsuits are in progress, whether or not anything happens. The genius of the Project 2025 plan, because this is directly out of their playbook,
yeah,
they're not even varying in any given way. The genius of the plan is when you tell everyone at USAID they're fired,
they leave.
three things happen. First, the
Yeah,
lawsuits. Second, they all have to go home with no pay and stay
right.
there for 2, 3, 4 years until the lawsuits
Yup.
end up coming through. Maybe they get some money back, maybe they don't. But third, they all find other jobs.
Right, right. That's the
Um,
thing. The law, the courts, too much of the American public thinks that it says, oh, the Constitution, oh, the law, all the courts. The courts have no power anymore.
right. Yep.
And
Or very delayed power at best.
the first day that Musk's 19-year-olds entered the State Department and the Treasury Department,
I thought you were
high
talking about
level
I thought you were going to talk about his little kid X. I was going to say he's only about
no
3 or 4.
high level officials in those like you can't just walk into those buildings. There's
No,
pretty intense security.
no.
They ordered the
And those
security
guys
to
have
not
military.
allow them in and not allow them access
Right.
because they had no legal status.
Exactly.
And the
And no security clearance.
and no security, but the security officers let them in.
Right.
So that's the thing. This that's why I say our democracy's gone. Right? Where's the FBI stepping in and stopping this? Where are police coming in? Like no,
Well, and
everyone
the
is just
problem
let them
here is
go.
the FBI doesn't step in until somebody at the top of the FBI tells them to. This is another place that's the
Mm-hmm.
genius of the plan, not Trump's
Yup.
plan, but the Project 2025. And I think Stephen Miller's got a lot to
Yes.
say about this one inside the White House, too. The
And that guy's
genius of the plan is the first thing that they did and the first thing they intended to do
Mm-hmm.
was get rid of everybody they could, not just at
Correct.
the political level, but below the political
Right.
level, who might say no, and to the best of their ability, put in their own handpicked people.
Correct.
And
Or
this is
just
where,
leave them vacant so they
right,
could do whatever they
exactly.
want.
But this is where this Trump term is so far ahead of the last
Yes.
Trump term and so much scarier
Yeah.
is they've got a bench of people ready to go. Where the first Trump term took them 2.5 years to come anywhere
Right.
near putting people into place.
Right.
This one, they've got the people that are set and ready to go. And that's just freaking scary when you look at that. But the other side then is what's going to happen with any of those agencies? Do they ever come back?
How can they
Is it-
recover? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Congress a little bit?
Sure.
Because
Hey, I want to give 2 things. I'm sorry. Before we go to Congress, I had one thing I forgot to mention. David Brooks had a good article in the New York Times today. Those words don't often come out of my mouth.
no, mine neither.
Brooks and I don't often agree. We've agreed a little more lately. I consider Brooks to be a Reagan-style conservative,
Yes.
and he's moved a little bit to the right since then. But he's an intelligent guy. Brooks had a great article today talking about this, talking about why all of these things is happening, and that the chaos is on purpose. But one of his big points is the current administration and the current MAGA Congress and the current Republican Party is not conservative. Ronald Reagan.
There is no Republican Party anymore.
Right.
I said
Ronald
this a
Reagan.
decade ago, and you argued with me.
Yeah,
I've been calling it a fascist party since 2015. They've adopted the principles of fascism, and it's squarely fascism now.
Well, one of the things
really
here,
can't
though, before that, although this is a piece of what fascism does, what they are doing now, if you look at this phase and the way that conservative David Brooks is looking at it, what they are doing now is eliminating the liberal intellectuals. And we have a government and we have universities right now where, yes, in our universities, the vast majority of people have liberal leanings in the way that we define them. They are to the left of center or to the left of center, mostly because we see a lot less people on the conservative side who go into academia at all. They go for the money, and people in academia don't go for the money. Well, the same thing happens in government. People in government are often there because they want to serve the people. They want to do government service at one
They're
level
civil
or
servants.
another. And civil servants make very little money. And
Correct.
what we've seen in our country is people on the conservative edge who are educated tend to go for the finance jobs and for the money
Mhm.
jobs and for those types of things. And there are just less people like that on that side of the political spectrum in civil service. A big piece of it is how little we pay civil servants. This isn't,
Big
the
piece of it,
liberals
yeah.
have taken over. This is just the natural dynamic of how our government works. And these people are being purposefully gutted in what Brooks calls an anti-intellectual move to get as many people as possible who might disagree out of the government and to make it an unwelcoming place for the people who are governing. And that's leaving us with no government. And that's
Right.
massively going to hurt the people who would normally be the constituents of the Republican Party.
And that is so these terms the American Constitution is the American political system was the American polity was we were a liberal society.
Right.
Freedom, equality,
Yep.
equal rights.
Right. Small L.
John Locke liberalism, capitalism, the pursuit of property, that is small L liberalism.
Yep.
The problem, and that why I say we no longer have the Republican Party no longer exists. We no longer have a conservative party. It is an illiberal party. They have adopted an entire platform that is anti-liberal. That is a synonym in our modern times for anti-democracy.
Yeah, and in European
the
terms,
organizing principle is hate.
Right.
Part of the other, that's fascism.
Part of our problem here in the conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat is we're a two-party system. If we were in Europe, there would be a conservative party and a liberal party, and then the far left party, and then the far right party.
Correct.
And in their terms, and this is happening in Europe too, we'll talk about that next week, the conservatives have pretty much disappeared or shut up.
Correct.
And I mean, I have conservative friends from Reagan era. They've all left what they consider the Republican Party, and they're homeless for the most part, or they've gone over and hope that they're going to get something out of the more conservative Democrats. And we now just have a far right dominant party in this country.
That's correct. But I will note, right, so I studied comparative political parties. I never published on it, but it was foundational in my work in early Russia in party creation. And as part of that, did study quite a bit about polarization. And people think that we are definitely an extremely polarized society.
Oh, yeah.
But when most people hear that, they think far right and far left. Yeah. But that's not what we have. We're polarized, and the distance between the MAGA party and the Democrats is wider than it ever was between Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah.
But the Democratic Party has not really moved to the left. The Republican Party has created the distance by moving so far to the right. The Democratic Party is actually more conservative today than it was under FDR. Bill Clinton moved the Democratic Party very much to the center. It has moved a little bit back left, but not on economic matters.
And frankly,
only
it was Bill Clinton that I will regularly say this. I stopped being someone who calls themselves a Democrat because of Bill Clinton moving the party, I think, to the right of center.
We have a centrist party and we have an extreme right party, but that makes us polarized. But the thing is, and the reason I say our democracy is gone, because I don't see how it recovers in a timeline that's meaningful to humans, like meaning in a lifetime.
Oh, I think it will, but I think
I disagree. So our system can't function without a conservative party. Because of the way the branches are set up, and Levitsky and Ziblatt in their two books, How Democracies Die and Tyranny of the Minority, they detail this really well. The way our system is set up, all of the political players have to accept the same norms. And that phrase guardrails has exploded into
Right.
popular discourse. It's their term to describe this. And the Republican Party has, with intent, demolished the guardrails. And the
Oh yeah,
guardrails were the Tip O'Neill kind of guardrails where
100%. Yeah,
we govern towards the center, the majority of the population's in the center. Well, the majority of the population was in the center
yeah,
when we
and
had
this
a
is
robust middle class.
yeah,
And
this is
so
the
they were
stuff.
competing for that.
So yeah, I've been talking about this. This is one of the primary things I'm studying now, the progression of the Republican Party and how the country changed, starting with Reagan and moving to a dislike of government, pushing for small government. But then you get into 1994, contract with America, contract on America, whatever you want to call it, Newt Gingrich. And that was a purposeful pulling apart of government, purposeful. How much can we negatively affect government over time? How much can we make things more difficult to do? And we've seen that continuing over time, even through Democratic administrations. You look at Obama, the number one thing the Republican Party wanted to do was gut the IRS, because when you gut the IRS, rich people don't have to pay taxes. And again, gutting of government along the way each step.
And that Gingrich revolution on our politics is what paved the way for this MAGA nightmare in our political system. Because as again, well, many authors have described this, but the one that became most popular is Levitsky and Ziblatt. He recast politics away from the consensus around the basic ideals and rules of government, and turned electoral politics into warfare, defeat as catastrophe.
Right.
And in minority, all you do is oppose, shut down government. Right. And our system isn't built for that. Our system is designed around agreement around the basics that we have these parties who represent different elements of society, and they govern towards the middle.
Right.
Part of the reason all that happened was Reagan's changes gutted the middle.
100%. Before the 1980s, and even a little bit into the 1990s, what we saw was we had the left and right, the conservative, the Republicans and the Democrats. They would agree on the same facts, and then they would disagree on solutions, and then they would come together, and they would create I win some, I lose some, you win some, you lose some, we come to a consensus.
The pork barrel politics.
Exactly. And then with Reagan, we started moving into team politics.
Yes.
Go team, and over the past 40 years, those teams, exactly as you're saying, have solidified to the place where there is no chance of a win-win situation. If you win, I lose. I feel like I lose everything, or that's the language I use, at least. Consensus is an absolutely dirty word. If you're on the left and you're progressive and you don't say everything right, you get canceled. If you're on the right and you don't say everything right, you're a rhino and you get canceled. And both sides have just been pushing to the point that there's no way they can talk to each other in many of these cases.
It is the nightmare that the founders in the Federalist Papers, was it number 10, warned about factionalism.
Right.
But it has reared its ugly head in the most ugly way. And this polarization that we talk about, the turn towards populist politics, again, started with Gingrich on the right. And when those messages on the right are anti-system messages,
right,
what option does the other party have in response to the anti-system messages?
Right.
We're defending the system. Their ideas are dangerous. They're going to destroy the system that we have come to live under and that's brought success. Like that you can't have only one populist party. When one party decides to go to those populist messages about purification and hate and things that are antithetical to the system, the other group is going to, you have no choice but to appeal to the other populist message. Right? It only takes one to tango in that. is the
Well, and
problem.
this frankly, I've got several things you just brought up, like 10 points for me. First, I think that's in a big
I got
picture.
10 points. I'm winning.
No, that's a big picture. Why the Democrats lost this time around is the Trump had started going populist in 2016. He lost it in 2020, but then this time around, he still went populist and told people he noticed them and told people he'd help them, even if he has no intention of helping them. And even if none of his policies so far have done anything, they've gone in the opposite direction.
Right.
But given all of that, people voted for him because the Democrats kept saying, oh, the economy's good and better. It's like, no, it's not. The economy's terrible for most people. Inflation's been going up for 40 plus years for most people, and wages have only gone up 20%, while costs are hundreds of percent for big picture stuff.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely awful, and the Democrats didn't notice it. They had that lack of going populism. Bernie and AOC have been telling him for years now that they need to do it more, and that's not the side the party has taken.
The only populist message was they're fascist, basically. They're
Right.
going to destroy our country, and they were right about that.
But also nobody knows what that means. And then
Yeah, that's the problem.
you've also got the old argument, whoever calls the other side a Nazi first loses. So you got to be careful that plays into different games. But the other side is what you're describing to me is a key problem with our two-party system. Whatever positives it might be theoretically, what we have now and what we had built over the past 200 years is a massively entrenched two-party system where nothing else can break into that system. And the problem to me becomes when one of those parties breaks down, as you're describing, the other one really has very little choice. And especially if one of them gets power while it breaks down, the other one has to go in that direction. So when Reagan took things more conservative, Clinton had to go in that direction. Yeah, I think Clinton was a genius for going to the right and winning the election. I didn't like it, but I thought it was a very smart thing to do.
And the Democrats tried to at the very end with that draconian immigration bill that they compromised on.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That was, they perceived that was to try to counter the hate messaging of the far right, but it was too little, too late. I agree.
Yeah, and I also think they were aiming at the wrong targets, and we can talk about this a little bit at the end. I think there might be some ways forward. To me, though, it is the one thing I am hopeful about is that historically fascism has a short lifespan because it eats itself. And it tends to cause too many problems and cost too much money. And over time, it breaks down. Now, one of the problems is with World War II, it took a world war and outside powers coming in to break it down. But the questions for me come up 2 years from now. Is there actually a change in Congress? And does that make any difference when that happens? And then 4 years from now, what kind of world are we living in? Trump had said, oh, I might be open to staying in office. There are multiple people on the MAGA movement, including in the White House, saying that he could stay in office. And then this weekend, he, of course, comes back because he does and goes back and forth nonstop, depending on what hour it is and what socks he has on. And he says, oh, no, I'd never do that. And we can expect that to change back and forth dozens of times over the next several years. But those are the important touchstone points to me on where this goes. And then the other thing is, I have a question of whether or not this group wants to destroy or whether or not they actually want to govern in what we would call a fascist direction. They are destroying. I'm not yet convinced that they actually want to govern. I think they may just want to destroy. And if what they're
I think it's split. I think some just want to destroy and most want to steal.
Right. Well, stealing, though, is not governing. That's different. You can steal by cutting taxes. And
that's their governing plan. They don't care about anything else.
Right. But that means that they're not governing at all. And that gives openings for populism on the other side.
But in the meantime, so the reason I'm gloomier than you is as much as I admired and liked President Biden, the institutions don't save you. All the institutions do is create the playground on which people play, right? So, but if the people in the playground don't recognize the slides as slides and don't
Right.
recognize the monkey bars as monkey bars and decide that digging is the way to go, those institutions are irrelevant. And when they dig and destroy those institutions, which is what this government, this regime is doing,
Right.
then what I said in my class, like the democracy, the system that we had up until now, it's gone. When those people were allowed to go into Treasury and State and steal the information, and the institutions couldn't protect itself, right? Its behaviors, and we're going like we were talking about earlier. The courts make a ruling, and the White House ignores it. There's no mechanism to stop that. And
Well,
the president, there is no rule of law.
constitutional-
The president is above the law right now. The
That
Supreme
becomes
Court
a
actually
constitutional crisis, and then the
Yeah.
question becomes: do we have violence? And what happens? So I was literally talking about this. A student brought up almost the exact same words you used in class yesterday, and it's like, I don't know exactly what's going to happen in a constitutional crisis. Here is what I know we should be looking at, and I don't know how it's going to play out. The first thing is Project 2025 wants to replace the Joint Chiefs and wants to get people at the top who are loyal to the country and military to retire, and bring in people who might be loyalists to the White House
fascists
and to the group. So if that happens, that is a problem. Now, if we had Mark Milley, if the White House, if the president refuses an order, and we had a General Milley who was there after January 6th, and the people who are in that same mindset, which is the mainstream of the military, especially military leadership, I could see them putting together a group to go to the White House and say, this is done, and we're going to fix this, and we're going to move that person into prison and let the system regroup. The same thing could happen with the police, with the Capitol Police, but the questions are, who's in charge of that? And are there the people there who look at their patriotic duty as the Constitution of the country versus looking at their patriotic duty as the regime that is in power? And even if you look at it as the Constitution of the country, you still got to have a lot of guts to buck the regime. You still have to do it. And then what happens afterwards is still very much up in the air. So that's my best case, though. That's my best case.
But that best case is America's democracy is gone with that. Something else will replace what we used to have and not be what we have now.
Right.
But once the military and security intervenes in politics, right, that is fundamentally anti-constitutional, right? And from the perspective of comparative constitutionalism, something has to come new after that.
I have the South Korean example from a couple of weeks ago in my head, and again, it's the one. Hey, something good happened where South Korean president tried to go in that direction, failed, but he didn't have the same setup. I also want to go back though,
and all the people poured into the streets and stayed in the streets in opposition, and the president's own party unanimously voted against it. Whereas this party won, and for God's sakes, frickin' Mitch McConnell is the one standing up to Trump. Yep. What the actual F?
If that's where we go with dying in thunderous applause, then that's going to be an issue. People are going to have to get out. And let me go back though. Let me go back though for a minute. The other time this has happened, and it was a different circumstance, was Ronald Reagan, who ran on the same concepts in 1980. He put in people to gut the education department, to gut the environment, to gut the interior department, and to gut the United Nations. And while they had negative effects on all of those things, they were not able to fully bring them down. I don't think he had quite as detailed a plan as the current Project 2020.
Nor was he as extreme.
He wasn't.
Nor was his intention or his goal as extreme, and it wasn't based on a plan of theft.
That is correct.
Of a dozen or so super rich.
Right.
right?
And by the way,
And that,
we're talking here, and this is direct, and this is, this is not conspiracy theory. I love talking to students about this and even
mm,
faculty. 10 or 15 years ago, to say this was a plan of the super rich, you would have been, thrown
oh,
ope to the side and
yeah,
nobody would talk to
yeah,
you.
correct,
Now, I lay out these basics, and the students are like, yeah, what's the problem? What's new? That's
right.
just describing reality. That's what we grew up with, is what it amounts to. But we're
It,
talking
Putin's dictatorship is what it is.
is a network that was
Hmm.
set up initially by the Koch brothers and
Yeah,
others in the
yeah.
founding of the Heritage Foundation in the
Mm,
1970s and the founding of several groups around it. I've got doing some research right now. I've got some help from a great grad assistant. The Koch brothers now have a network of 430 organizations,
yep.
and they work on culture change and societal
Hmm.
change and making these kind of plans. The starting point was
Starting with the state level,
well, yeah,
state
and
level politics is where it started.
school boards and counties
Yeah,
and
yeah,
municipalities
yeah,
and states.
yeah.
But they're beginning, and this is just to put this in everybody's head, it was the 1970s when the only people in the country who were anti-abortion was the Catholic Church, and they
Yeah,
weren't political about it because they didn't
right,
think it would go anyplace, and
right,
the Catholic Church wasn't a political institution. The
right.
1980s, what they started with was conservative Christianity, evangelical Christianity, was fed information that told them that going against abortion would give political benefits
Yep,
and would help their political cause and
yep,
help highlight that. And that moved into it. And now, over time, what have we seen? Moms for Liberty doesn't
yeah.
exist without these groups and without these think tanks. The messaging, you can go to any Moms for Liberty person anywhere in the country, and they're reading off a sheet of paper
Yes,
handed to them by a think tank funded by
uh,
billionaires,
yeah,
not because the billionaires want to ban books, but because they want all the side benefits of the chaos
correct.
and of the lack of education
It's a
system.
way of them seizing political control and political power.
Exactly. And all of these things that are coming in, anti-queer, anti-trans, anti-immigration, that's been there since the beginning of the country. But the anti-immigration messages all come from this tiny number of groups who feed them in at the bottom,
Right.
bring them up to the top, feed them to the media. Podcasts just pick up these things. They're sent them. They're on their lists. They pick them up and they read them. Breitbart, Fox News pick these
Yeah.
things up and read them. And this is the information that Americans get. But more importantly, this is the information that's being pushed by the leaders. And it is a concentrated effort that's been going on over 40 years. It's not a bunch of rich people in their hats with their cigars and with their drinks saying, ha ha ha, we're going to win. It's a few
No.
people behind the scenes that keep pushing in the same direction, and a tiny group of ultra rich people at the top get power out of it and more money and more power and more ability to push society. And this has put us where we're at.
But what's really frightening is
Oh,
you
Tim.
could take that whole story. You
We're
could
not
take
being
that
happy
whole
here.
story around abortion and you can replace it with guns. You can
Absolutely.
replace it with um, sexual orientation or gender identity.
Right.
You can replace it with race. You can replace it with immigration.
Right.
The thing is it is so comprehensive across the entirety of all of the major issues traditionally in American politics. And it is tied to destruction and emasculation of institutions and norms.
Absolutely.
And the organizers and the whatever the brains behind all of that have seized power, and the money behind it is with them sucking the money out.
Absolutely.
And that is that it's not just like it's all exploding at once across the whole country, kind of like a nuclear blast.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying whatever happens in the future, wherever this country, like if you're right and this fascist effort crumbles in a couple of years, we're still going to have something very different than any of us has ever lived in.
And it's
is on the other
and
side.
it's going to be chaos to figure out what comes back.
Correct. Yeah, because like you talked about at the Joint Chiefs, but look at who's in charge of the Department of Education. Someone whose mission is to eradicate the Department of Education.
Right.
Look who's in charge of the EPA, someone whose mission it is to eradicate the EPA.
Yep.
Look who's in charge of HHS, someone whose mission it is to eradicate HHS. Look who's in charge of Medicare and Medicaid, someone whose mission is to eliminate Medicare and Medicaid.
Yeah.
Pick the only cabinet level official whose mission isn't to eradicate his department is the Secretary of State, and he's very weak.
You want to know the good news?
No. We're at 46 minutes? Are we done?
No, I've got good news for you. The good news is, with the people in charge of health right now, and especially HHS, the likely thing that's going to happen is we're never going to know it when the bird flu hits us.
That's true. We'll just die.
And half of us will go away. Yeah, by the way, now it's not just, I just heard some good updates on stats in the bird flu because I was listening to NPR and they had some scientists on. We're still getting a tiny amount of information, but because the government's not allowed to publish any information, scientists have to share it through back channels.
And they haven't eliminated NPR yet. That'll be soon.
That'll be soon. Scientists are creating their own channels. So, bird flu isn't likely to become a human-to-human transmissible thing. It could. Scientists are worried about it. But it's still only about 100 humans that have had the bird flu. It's contained. The problem is it's now moved from birds to cattle. And now...
Yeah, and RFK Jr. is going to eliminate pasteurization.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And the cattle between raw milk and meat is just going to be absolutely horrific. And, you think that eggs are expensive, chickens are going to be out of the stores, and then beef's going to be out of the stores.
Yep.
And when it moves to cattle, it's more likely to go to more humans, even if it's not human-to-human transmissible. So even if it doesn't kill us, it's going to demolish our food supply and make things enormously more expensive in our food supply, and we're not going to know about it.
You know why we're not going to know about it? Because all the funding for the research has been dried up because they've eliminated all the grant funding.
Absolutely. Well, not just the research. I mean, before the research, we're not going to know about it because they're not testing the agencies that would tell us about it. That would normally tell us about it. But the same thing that then you go to cancer research and you go to everything else that the government funds, and it's just insane. Mm-hmm. And we're going to need more people like Howard Hughes. I don't know if you know it, and most people don't. Howard Hughes's fortune went to scientific funding that was separate from the government. His foundation only does scientific funding that the government's not doing and takes no government money so they can do independent stuff. Yeah. But, how many billionaires are going to be willing to fund that? And that's still nowhere near what the U.S. government can put into it.
And the billionaires wouldn't dare because then they'd run afoul of their overlords who control the government and who are going to direct the money their way, the tax cuts and all that.
Yep.
So if anything, there will be less funding for scientific research from people like Bezos, people like the Google guys.
Right. Well, that's one of the other scary things. Seeing the billionaires go in and not just go down to Mar-a-Lago and kiss the ring, but seeing billionaires changing policies directly. DEI policies gone.
Yep.
The lawsuit against, I forget, was it Google or was it somebody else, that they just paid off the lawsuit that Donald Trump had because it was easier than actually fighting it. Just literally, Donald Trump picked up $125 million because of a defamation lawsuit that he absolutely would have lost if it would have gone through the courts, but the company decided to settle. And these
Target is eliminated. Like everyone's just following in line. That's
and they are afraid of them being targeted. Yeah.
And we call a government based on fear. Right-wing governments driven by hate that are based on fear and are kleptocracies.
By the way, folks, when we say fascism, this is another thing. Don't look to Nazi Germany, please. Look to Italy first.
Yes.
That's the place. If you want to look at history, we don't get very good history on Italian fascism, but it is much more equivalent to what we are looking at right now than Nazi
Germany. Still very violent.
Oh, yeah.
So let's not sugarcoat it.
And it's not that we don't have some aspects of Germany, but Germany was following Italy too when it came.
We have aspects of the Germany. It's not. It's outwardly directed at not Jews, although not great. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, but Yeah, and people who doubt, it's really funny, the ones who laugh and call you alarmist when you describe it as fascism are the people who have not read about fascism.
Right.
It is startling if you read, whether it's the classics like Hannah Arendt or Eric Fromm from the 30s, 40s,
Right.
or more contemporary like Anna Applebaum or what's his name, Finkelstein, who wrote the wannabe dictators.
Right.
Um, all of these guys, like, it is textbook fascist organization, messaging, and
Right.
methods. It's
Let me turn the conversation here a little bit. I know you're still going to want to come back to fascism.
apple pie or cheesecake, or like, what are we going to talk about?
Exactly. So I still don't personally. I probably said the word fascism more times in this discussion than I've said in the past couple of years.
Yeah, you've been arguing with me about this for a decade.
I have, but I've also realized why I'm doing it, and I put it more into context as I'm working with other projects on the side, the Come Together project, if you want to look it up, folks.
Never heard of it.
As I'm doing that, we'll have to put something in here. As I'm doing that, what I'm realizing is I believe that if we want to take this back, fascism is not a message that's going to sell. I think the message that we're going to have to sell to people is very similar to what Trump sold. I think we need to learn some lessons from that. I think we need to start talking to people left, right, and center, however you define yourself, about your lives, about what's happening in your lives, about how it's possible for government to help your lives, about how currently government's letting you down, and start focusing on the things. So instead of talking about the stuff that we are, which is insanely important and which is going to affect their lives, let's get into some of the negatives. So what
about the corruption and the kleptocracy is what you're talking about.
Absolutely. They just cut 1,000 jobs from Veterans Affairs. That's going to screw veterans. You thought veterans were bad before. They're screwed.
And you thought these guys were supporting the military and supporting veterans? No.
Not at all.
And they are not defending any blue line at all.
Housing, we're not going to see any changes nationally in terms of these giant companies scooping up housing and the costs of housing. Look at the homeless problem. Do you know how much money it costs to put homeless people in jail as opposed to building group housing and giving them a chance to get back on their feet? Social Security payments, your Social Security is going to be cut, and that money is going to go to the top instead of going to
back to you because you paid into it.
To me, these are the places where we are better. If we want to fix this, we are better off looking at commonalities as opposed to openly fighting the evil. Because
I think you have to do both.
I think you do, but I think the issue is you need to do one in the big picture and one in the press and in the public. But if we don't start talking to everyone in language that they understand and that affects their everyday lives. Let's go back to Bill Clinton again, the genius hatred I have for Bill Clinton. It's the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
That's something that Trump talked about during the campaign and now has done a complete 180 on. We need to pick up. I don't know that it's the Democratic Party that's going to do it, but there needs to be an opposition that picks up the message of it's the economy, stupid, and that talks about the real economy, that the people who are suffering in the real economy and what we should be doing to help those people. And that's where we need to go if we actually want a people's movement. You said it yourself, in some ways we're going to have to fight populism with populism. But to me, it's got to be a populism that focuses on working people, not a populism that focuses on the academic elite concepts, because the Republicans and the MAGAs attack that too easily. The fascist groups attack the academic elites too easily. They have effectively demonized us, Joel. We're going up against the wall pretty quickly if the wall ends up happening.
They've been demonizing us for a quarter century. So, but here's the problem. Here's the concern, right? So we've been through this as a country before. We've experienced this. And we fixed it, and we know how to fix it. So extreme inequality, like we're more unequal now than we were before the stock market crash in the late 20s. Inequality brings resentment.
Yep.
Resentment opens the field for populism.
Right.
Populism brings anger. Anger brings political change.
Right.
When the Depression hit, right, there had been extreme inequality. It brought the resentment. There was populist politics. But FDR won. The
Right.
populist on we're going to fix it won.
Right.
We have the same dynamics here, all multiplied by 100. The inequality dwarfs what it was at the time of the stock market crash.
Yeah.
Like the robber baron capitalism was, a thriving middle class compared to what we have
I just
now.
looked this up this week. In 1980, there were 0 billionaires. In
Right.
1983, there were 6. That's how recent billionaires are.
Right. So the problem is the populists that won this time was the extreme right in this country. Around Europe, the extreme right won in the 30s. Right? The populism, it was the same situation of inequality and resentment. The right wing won in Europe. What saved the planet was that the liberal populist won here. This time, we've got the extremist right wing populists in power.
I agree.
That's frightening.
I do think it is possible that we are going to see the people swinging enough that they will be open to a movement. They're going to swing in exactly the way you're suggesting. I think you covered the historical trends that are going to happen again. Things are going to get worse and worse. People are going to lose hope to the point that it turns into anger, and that frustration turns into anger. Now, we could also see like the 1960s.
What's it going to take?
My
hope was in the pandemic. I thought the pandemic was going to bring us together and see our human side and we can get through this together and restore our country.
I don't know what
is the catastrophe.
I don't know what the new version of the 1960s is going to be, but we saw inner cities burning. And that's what led to the Great Society in the 1960s. Just like the Depression led to FDR in the 1960s, there was so much frustration, largely race-based at that point in time, because those were the people who were most repressed by society, were Black Americans, and especially Black Americans in inner cities. But that group and that area blew up. Now we're seeing repression that's across the board. That is, everybody in the bottom 75% is repressed, and the next 20% aren't doing so great either, comparatively. So
I see the civil rights and the Great Society and all that. All of that was legacy of the greatest generation of World War II. Yeah. I think World War II was still the referent catastrophe of the bringing us together and building the middle class and expanding access to the middle class of that era, or at least the intention of it. Right? Public housing turned out not to work so well, but the ideas behind public housing were altruistic, and it didn't work. But anyway, I see World War II as that was the catastrophe that we were still responding to then.
Hey, Joel.
Wait, where is he?
We're at 58 minutes. Ask me the final question.
What's the final question? Fix it, Brian. Fix it, Brian. Fix it. How you gonna fix it?
Here's my hope.
We're going to come together.
We can come together.
Right now, over me.
Come Together Project.squarespace.com is one of the hosts I get to plug.
Never heard of it.
Here's my hope. Oh, and we're on TikTok too. Here is where I think we might be able to go. It's true. Quit making me cough on camera.
Yeah.
I think it's got to start local. I think we need to copy what Reagan did and what the Republican Revolution in the 90s did.
Took 25 years.
It could be. I think we need to start local, start state, start in the school board, start in local government. We've got a lot of young people right now with very little hope, and who unfortunately are probably going to have some time on their hands to do some organizing when they get through things, if they're not too busy working 4 jobs to survive. And we also have people who are going to be losing their Social Security, and we're going to have older people with very little hope. I think we are in a place where we can start organizing education, where we can start organizing school boards, local communities. I think we can do local community help. I think we can push to move away from individualism, because we're not going to be able to survive as individuals when everything comes down. We're going to have that community again.
When you got to move Miami to Nebraska, you can't solve that as individuals.
Yeah. I think we need to take the communitarian side and figure out how to become communities again. I'm also going to say politically, sadly, I think that has to start in the blue states because the red states governments are pushing in the other direction. They're pushing to work harder to separate people and keep them out. They're pushing for voter suppression. We see California, Illinois, New York, California and Illinois, I think, doing it more than anything else. Colorado's doing it, Oregon and Washington. These can be the incubators for local community to teach us how to be community again. And I think if we're going to come out of this on the other end, we are going to have to learn how to contribute at the local level, because we're not going to be able to fight the big picture politics until we get a groundswell of people who are there to fight the big picture politics. And this is me being idealistic and hopeful, but I'm being idealistic and hopeful in a place where, damn, things are looking really bad, and I'm just not sure what else is out there. Normal fights aren't going to do it. The people have to become involved.
The odd thing is it sounds like you're calling for states' rights. Get rid of FEMA and let the states take care of their own disaster relief.
I think
that's
FEMA's
going to help the states you identified. New York, Illinois, California are the beneficiaries of that.
And FEMA's getting rid of itself.
Most threatened by, say, climate change problems,
right,
are the ones that are gonna really hurt from what they've been pushing.
It's going to be bad, and as you said, move Miami to Nebraska. We're going to have climate refugees. That's one of the things.
We already do,
less, right? But as government gets less,
there are 2 million. Aren't going to exist. There are 2 million internally displaced people in the United States of America today.
Yep.
So let's leave with that happy thought.
See, I tried to go good. I tried to give the people a little bit of hope for the future, and you just dashed it. You keep wanting to go fascist.
Come moving up slowly. You got juju eyeballs.
I would like to end with something from Les Miserables, but I don't think either one of us can actually hear the people sing right now. I think we need to close with that. By the way, I have to keep reminding myself that was a revolution that failed, so we need to be careful.
Don't tell the French that, because they kind of, yeah. Anyway,
I think that's where we need to stop it for today.
That's where we need to stop it. We will continue on the theme next week when we talk about the collapse of the old world order as a result of our dysfunction here in the United States.
We're going to get so much happier.
We have a great guest who will be joining us. So for now, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Thanks, David, for producing. Like and share with all of your Republican friends. And we will see you next time on the World Discord Podcast. Bye-bye.